Hi, everyone. My name is Samuel Petcash, and I am from Old Dominion University. And the title of my poster is Challenges and Potentials of Ocular Measures in Assessing Pilot Workload. So, modern aircraft, they use advanced automated technologies, and essentially pilots have become more and more of passive monitors of a system instead of actively controlling every single bit of the cockpit and the airplane system in general. And this makes it important to measure pilot workload in these automated systems and the airplanes in general. Workload is a very complex and multifaceted psychological construct that isn't directly observable, which presents a challenge in directly, again, observing challenges in optimizing human machine integration as well. And then again, in automated settings where a human may not be a direct, have a direct influence on certain flight operations, it's important to be able to measure workload in real time. So my current project presents an extensive literature review to evaluate the challenges and potentials of a series of novel eye measures engaging pilot workload during flight operations. So the first, I have a series of five of them here. The first measure that we looked at was blink rate. So it's been shown that there's a negative correlation between blink rate and workload in aviation contexts. So essentially, the higher the blink rate that someone has, the lower their workload is, and then vice versa as well. So blink rate does reliably predict workload in primary contexts. So essentially, where the pilot is just flying the plane and doesn't have any other tasks. So blink rate reliably predicts workload in those scenarios. But in scenarios where, and in tests and studies where the pilot has to do something other than flying the plane, like has some kind of secondary task, blink rate may not reliably predict workload as it would if the pilot is just flying the plane. And then moving on to microsaccades. So microsaccades are the tiny involuntary eye movements that occur when someone is fixating on a certain thing. So a regular saccade essentially is the movement between fixations, but a microsaccade is the very, very small involuntary eye movement when someone is fixating on a certain point. So it's been shown that an increased magnitude coupled with a decreased rate of microsaccades implies increased cognitive load. And microsaccades they've been shown very well to greatly measure and more accurately measure workload, but the analysis is limited by the need for a very high sampling rate, so over 300 hertz, which is generally, unfortunately, beyond the capabilities of commonly available eye trackers in applied settings. Moving on to fixations. Fixations essentially are a brief period where the eye is, again, focused on a certain area of interest or a certain area where the person's eye is directly focused on something for a specific period of time. So it's been shown that longer fixations represent a difficulty in checking or interpreting an instrument. So, for example, if someone is fixating on a part of the cockpit for a long time, it essentially means that they may have difficulty in interpreting that specific instrument. And also, the number of fixations reflects the importance of an element. The most important part of measuring fixations when it comes to gauging pilot workload is making sure in the future to standardize between studies is to standardize fixation thresholds. That makes it extremely important to look at what is the accepted minimum duration of a fixation. So because different studies may have different times and different interpretations for that, which makes looking at fixations more difficult to interpret when it comes to measuring workload in aviation contexts. So moving on to pupil diameter and activity. It's been shown that pupil diameter and real-time index of pupillary activity, which is short for RIPA, positively correlate with workload. So the real-time index of pupillary activity essentially is a method for analyzing the frequency of pupil diameter oscillations in real time. Uh, the most important thing to look at for pupil diameter and activity is to make sure between studies and in specific studies to control for the ambient light levels across operational environments. And this may be challenging just due to the fact that obviously light changes throughout scenarios, but making sure that controlling for the ambient light levels is very important to measure workload due to essentially if the lighting changes throughout the study, this may impact the pupil diameter. So it's important to make sure to control for that due to the accuracy of workload measurements with pupil diameter. In the last eye tracking measure that I looked at was gaze transition entropy. Gaze transition entropy is essentially looking at a series of AOIs, so areas of interest, where the researcher would draw circles or squares around a specific area where you would want the participant to look at. So the researcher would draw those two or multiple areas of interest, and gaze transition entropy essentially is how frequently someone switches between different areas of interest. So it's been shown that high demanding flight procedures are associated with higher dispersion in eye fixation, which means it would be a higher gaze transition entropy because the eye movements are quickly moving between and frequently moving between different areas of interest. It's also been shown that gaze transition entropy increased when multitasking load was high in flight simulation. And the most important thing to look at for gaze transition entropy in workload measurements is when it comes to dynamic versus static areas of interest. So gaze transition entropy is the most useful when the areas of interest are static and well-defined instead of dynamic, which the static areas of interest allow for a more meaningful interpretation of the visual scanning efficiency with pilots and workload measurement. So overall, to conclude, while these new series of eye tracking measures offer promising real-time measures of workload in pilot scenarios and aviation scenarios, many of them, if not all of them, are context specific. They also require rigorous standardization and very rigorous evaluation as well. So yeah, that's my presentation. Thank you very much, and I'm very much looking forward to questions soon.